Welcome. We're Juris Education. We're a team of law school admissions counselors here to help you craft the perfect application and ace the LSAT, GRE bar exam, or MPRE. To our wonderful audience, welcome tonight. The topic we'll be discussing is crafting your application narrative. Just some housekeeping rules. We do have a chat option for you. Towards the end of our presentation, we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A, so please feel free to drop any sort of questions you have in the chat, and we'll get to them in those 15 minutes. Overall, we're looking at running this webinar for 45 minutes, 30 of just content, and then those 15 mentioned earlier. It is recorded, so if any reason you have to drop out, or if you think you know somebody who might be interested in the recording, you will receive this via email, and you can do with it as you wish, including review it as many times as you like. That's really it for me. So before we begin the presentation and sort of going through the content, I want to take a moment to introduce you to your wonderful panelists today. We have John and Christina. So John, do you want to take a minute and just introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it off to Christina as well?
Sure. My name is John Rodriguez. I am a recent graduate of Georgetown Law, currently working at a law firm in Los Angeles. Applied for law school, right before COVID. So I started law school in 2020, applied in 2019, been through the whole process. I understand the stress of it, made it to the other side. It's fine. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you, John. Christina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Aldemay. I'm currently a law student at Northwestern. I haven't graduated yet, but I'm in my last semester. I'll graduate in May. I actually applied the year after you did, so I started in 2021.
Fantastic, and welcome to you both. We're excited to have you here, and we're excited to soak up all your knowledge. With that being said, let's talk about crafting your application narrative. For our audience, this is a little bit of our agenda. So we'll talk about crafting a compelling narrative, showcasing your achievements, navigating the resume, and navigating recommendations. So first off, what is an application narrative? John, did you want to begin?
Yeah, so your application narrative is, like it says on the slide here, the story that you're telling with your application. It's going to include, obviously, the sort of the raw numbers, the LSAT score, the GPA, all of that, but it's also going to include your resume. It's going to include your personal statement. That's really the thing that's going to tie it all together and give them a sense of who you are. But it's basically that. It's the thread that runs through your application to tell these law schools who you are and why, and more importantly, why they should admit you into their school.
Perfect. Christina, did you have anything else to add on to that?
I think you're on mute.
Oh, Christina muted.
Sorry. I just want to echo what John said, and when you're thinking about your personal statement, your diversity statement, if you want to write one, if you're writing an essay for any named scholarships to that school, it all comes together in one cohesive story. And as you're writing pieces of your application, you want to be thinking, what do I want the admissions committee to be thinking of me after they've read this, after they've seen it? And you want that to create a bigger picture, and you want that to, the way you want to be described, the way you want to describe yourself, you want that to continue to echo throughout everything you submit in your application. And I'm sure we'll talk more about what that can look like as we go forward in the webinar.
So, crafting a compelling narrative.
So, what is the personal statement? So it's the opportunity to tell the admissions committee your story outside of your grades and your test scores. Talks about what experiences you've had, why you want to go to law school, kind of who you are behind the raw numbers of your application. And it gives you the opportunity to tell a story that you might not be able to tell if your application was just your transcript and a few letters of recommendation. And a personal statement is important for a lot of reasons because it shows off your writing skills, it shows off how well you can be concise and just how well you can present yourself and how well you can articulate your motivations and the reasons why you want to apply to that program in particular. John?
Yeah. So I want to echo everything that Christine just said, but also I think everybody here sort of knows, we've been on the forums, we've talked to lawyers, we've law students, we've seen Reddit. We know that law school admissions is in a lot of ways a numbers game. They care primarily about your LSAT score and your GPA, but your personal statement is still very important because especially if you're sort of out of school for a little bit, it's like, okay, this is the career that I've had prior to law school. You can talk about that. Or it's like, what makes you different from every other kid who's trying to go to this law school, right? Because they get plenty of applications. So you want to set yourself apart. And this will really come in, if there's two candidates that they're looking at, and it's like, how do we differentiate? Well, this is how, right? They want to know who you are and what you're going to bring to the academic environment of the school.
So let's chat about some strategies for developing a strong personal statement.
Okay, I can start. So some strategies for developing a strong personal statement. I always think that it's best to start with experiences that have really impacted you, whether it is the work that you've done between undergrad and law school, your family life, a volunteering position that really impacted you. It's really important to tell a story, and I always start by having people list things that are important to them. What happened to you that you think really impacted the way you show up in the world, that really impacts the way you work, the way you interact with people? You kind of start from there, just because you want to talk about your personal growth, because those stories can tell a lot about how you handle adversity and you handle challenges. And law school is very difficult, very much so your 1L year. And so it's important to kind of show how you handle what life throws at you, how you chase your goals, how you articulate those goals, and how you've achieved them over the years. And so that's where I would say you kind of start. But I will say something that's been really interesting to see where people start. It's not always where they finish. You kind of start with one theme or one topic, and as you talk through it, as you think more about what you want to highlight, you can kind of hone into one moment of your life. It could span over time. It could be one moment. It could be one instance, one conversation. And I think that's what is really interesting about writing a personal statement, and what can really grasp the attention of the admissions committee.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. Christina definitely hit on the content piece of it, and this is very important for sort of telling that story. And the other piece that's very important is sort of showcasing your writing ability, because lawyers are first and foremost writers. Whether you're in a litigation practice or a transactional practice, you're writing, whether it's briefs, contracts, emails, whatever, like your ability to write is the most important ability you'll have as a lawyer. I forget who said this quote, but someone said, inside of every lawyer is a struggling novelist. And it's true, right? You're trying to showcase your writing ability and show that, like, yes, they're going to still have to train you in the legal knowledge and the specific sort of style of writing that you'll need as an attorney, but they also will be looking at this to see your ability as a writer generally, and how can you put words together to tell a compelling narrative. I apologize. Give me 1 minute.
Don't worry, it absolutely happens. It absolutely happens. So, Christina, did you want to chat about the role in shaping the overall application narrative?
Yeah, so the personal statement is the bedrock. It is one of the most important parts of shaping the overall narrative because you have your resume, you have your transcript, you have your personal statement, you have your LSAT score. You have all those things that kind of tell parts of the story, and they can look at your resume and see what you've done and your leadership um, roles and all those things, but that's only half the story. You can't really get everything said in a few bullet points on your resume. And so when you're writing your personal statement and your diversity statement or any of the other statements that they might um, make available to you, that's where you have the opportunity to tie together what you've provided on these on your transcript and your resume and kind of breathe life into them and kind of show them who you are, show your personality, and kind of showing why you're uniquely um, capable of being successful at their law school, why they should want you to be there, why you would bring what you would bring to their overall class. Because when the admissions committee is picking who to join in 1L class, they're building a cohort of people and they're kind of looking at what fits together and who represents their school. And so you really want to make sure your statement shows them who you are and why you'd be a good fit for that school. John?
Yeah, 100%. And then I think another good piece of a personal statement or something that it can be very useful for is, let's say one or both of your numbers is not where you want it to be. This can be a good place to talk about, to sort of explain that and give the university some context. Like for me, for example, I was a splitter. I'm sure people know what that means, but I had a very good LSAT score and a not so good GPA. And so one of the things that I used my personal statement for was to sort of explain how that happened. And I had 2 years between undergrad and law school, so I sort of was able to tie that all together, and I used my personal statement to do that.
Exactly. I think that is something key that you just said in terms of explaining maybe some of the downfalls in your application. I know some people like to write addendums, but those parts of your application don't get to be as detailed as a personal statement, and so you can really talk through any challenges and weave that into your story as well.
Fantastic. So let's tell our audience a little bit about showcasing your achievements and what the significance of showcasing your achievements even is.
Right. And this goes back to providing the whole story or crafting a story and showing who you are. And on the slide here, it says holistic view. And I feel like that's such a buzzword, but like it's really true, kind of giving the admissions committee the whole picture. And your personal statement is one way outside of, your resume, where you can kind of showcase your achievements, not just by, again, the 3 bullet points that you can fit on the page, but by really diving into a story and showing how well you're able to adapt and showing your motivations and showing your experiences and being able to use language and using the tools at your disposal and your writing style to really show those achievements and showcase what you've been able to achieve throughout your undergraduate years after graduating and what you'll be able to achieve moving forward and what you hope to achieve moving forward.
Yeah, and then another thing you can also do is, let's say you have some experience in a specific industry or field as, I don't want to say layperson, but that's the word we'll use, layperson, as a non-lawyer. And that's the kind of law you want to practice, well, it's like, okay, you want to talk about that in your personal statement, especially if the school you're applying to, or if many of the schools you're applying to have programs, especially in that area. Like, let's say you've worked at I don't know, I was in DC. So let's say you worked at the World Bank and you want to practice international law and you're applying to Georgetown, GW, AU, then you're going to want to talk about that experience and the work you did at the World Bank, and say like, hey, this is why I want to go to your school, because I know you have a robust international law program, and I've already done all this work in that field, and so that's why I want to go to your school, or that's why I want to practice this field.
So, examples of impactful achievements.
Right, so that can be anything, and as we see on the screen, it's grades, honors, awards, leadership positions, community service, internships. One thing I will say is that in a personal statement, you want to be concise and you kind of want to focus on a particular story, kind of breathe life into that and develop that. But you totally can pick something that you probably already have on your resume, these honors, these awards, and kind of use that to show who you are and to show why you would be a good fit for the law school and to kind of show your personal growth. So internships, research projects, John already mentioned, like relevant employment. And as we see here, it's resilience, adaptability. What are the things that make you you? What are the unique perspectives that you can bring to the classroom and to your future as an attorney? And I think that's one of the reasons why it would be great if you could use, an achievement as part of your personal statement. You don't have to, but that's definitely a good option.
Yeah, and you can also use this to sort of showcase things that may not get as much airtime on your resume. Like, for example, for me, I had produced an album of music before, like in between college and law school, and where am I going to put that on my resume? There's like a little tiny little sentence or bullet point at the very bottom that no one's going to look at. So I used the personal statement. One of the things I included in there was that, and sort of told the story of like my journey with music and how that sort of led me to the law and that sort of thing. But you can sort of do anything, like those sorts of things that are a big part of who you are, but won't get as much play on your resume.
Very cool. And I think that's really helpful for individuals who have achievements and accomplishments that aren't necessarily linear and straightforward and really related to law. For example, your album. So, presenting achievements in a compelling way.
Right. And so, as we talked about before, your writing and writing style and the way you draft your personal statement is super important. And your resume is one piece, right? One piece of your application that will probably showcase your achievements. And as John mentioned, it could be a bullet point. You could have given it a whole section, bolded, three or four bullets. You could have given it a nice chunk on that paper. But even then, you still haven't breathed life into that story. It's not like, oh, this is the metric, and it's not boring, but they're not really getting the full story. And so when you want to talk about your contributions and how you were able to get these achievements, you want to really talk about it in a colorful way and talk about how it really affected your trajectory in life, and talk about why it's so important, and why, even if it's not linear or super connected to law, why the traits that you've learned from that experience, or the passion or the drive that you got through that experience, can translate into your career in law.
Yeah, and I second all of that. And I think it's also, like, again, an exercise in your writing ability, right? Because as an attorney, you're an advocate. And here is sort of your first test of that. You're advocating for yourself of why you should go to X, Y, or Z law school, right? And that's a skill that you're going to need. And so they do want to see your ability to advocate. Whether you're a litigator, or transactional attorney, whatever you want to do, you're going to have to advocate for your client's positions. And so schools are going to want to see like how you do that, who are you? If you can't advocate for yourself, then how can you advocate for a client, right? That's sort of the thinking. And so you want to be able to tell that compelling narrative, tell that story, and not just what happened, but how you tell it must be compelling too.
So let's talk about the resume a little bit more and what sort of the purpose of the resume in regards to the law school application. Sean, did you want to speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. I'll start on this one. So the resume, the relative importance of it sort of depends on where you are relative to undergrad, right? Like if you just graduated college, or if you're still in college and you're applying to law school, law school admissions are going to know that your resume is going to be pretty sparse. You just got here. Like no one's expecting a whole lot, right? But if you've had like a 10-year career between college and law school, then your resume becomes a lot more important, because at that point your grades actually aren't going to matter that much, because that was 10 years ago. Who you were 10 years ago is not who you are today. And so they're going to be looking a lot more at your resume. It's like, okay, what were you doing the last 10 years? And this will, again, play into things you may want to talk about in your personal statement, and just like who you are and what experiences you'll bring to the table, whatever law school you go to.
I 100%. Ooh, okay. Now we can move on. I was just going to agree with what John said.
No, go ahead. I'm so sorry. It looked like it skipped out on us.
I was just going to say that I 100% agree with the differences between maybe not having as much experience, but also having a ton of experience, and how you can use that to your advantage when talking through your resume. If you don't have that much experience, it's not a big deal. It's not going to drastically affect your chance of getting in. A lot of people go straight from undergrad, but if you can talk about the experiences you've had on campus, your internships, that's a highlight as well.
Fantastic. So, tips for organizing and actually presenting this information.
So I think a lot of law schools have resume drafts on their website, the way they like legal resumes to look. I know a lot of schools have like on-campus interviewing templates as well. I think it'd be beneficial to go ahead and just make your resume in that style. Obviously, as you continue on your legal career, that could change as you continue on in school. But if that school, or if they all look very similar, so I would just kind of look up a law school resume and start with that template. From there, there's definitely an art to the way you present the information, being concise and not being super vague. And when you can, have the numbers, especially if you have experience working, it's better to say, I led a team this and worked on this amount of projects, handling a specific amount of money, or being as specific as you can be, because it's less vague and people can picture exactly what you were doing. And I think that's the beauty of the resume. It's quick, it's concise, and there's definitely an art to it. And if you want to use it to your advantage in terms of having more work history, I think that's when that definitely comes more into play in terms of being able to fit more information on one page.
Yeah, 100%. I'm still using the Georgetown resume template that they gave us, and it worked out for me. I think the piece about the numbers, like including numbers, is very important, and it's very helpful. Another thing you want to add is, like, in those bullet points, you want to have action verbs. You don't want to use the passive voice. I'm sure your high school and college writing teachers, like, laid this into you, but like, you don't want to use passive verbs, and you want to sort of show, like, you use this as a writing exercise as well to show your accomplishments and sort of paint that in the best light and paint those experiences in the best light. You don't want to like exaggerate or embellish, but you do want to sort of tell it as best you can and paint the truth in the best light as you can.
So highlighting relevant experiences and skills.
Yeah, so for this, again, you, especially if you're sort of later on, you may have more experiences than will fit on a single page. So, or even if you are just out of college and you're sort of the type A personality that I was not, you've probably done a lot of things. But so you do kind of want to pick and choose what you're going to put on that resume. And yeah, you should tailor it to things that, either relate to the legal field, relate to a specific area of law that you want to practice, research projects, things that demonstrate those sort of analytical, critical thinking skills that you'll need in law school and as a lawyer. And if you've worked in a law office for a law firm, even better, right? Throw that on there, give that a place.
Christina, did you have anything to add?
Well, we can go. I think I echo what John had to say. If anyone has questions, we can get to them in Q&A.
Absolutely.
Recommendations.
Christina, let's go.
Yes. So recommendations are super important. It's basically how other people see you, especially professors, people you've worked with, and their ability to see you as a lawyer, and their ability to see in you what you're basically saying to the admissions committee, and they're super important. They provide insight into your work ethic, what you've done. As we can see here on the slide, it reinforces the narrative. That being said, choose very carefully. Choose very carefully. It's a very important piece, and I think a lot of people can really get bogged down by trying to find someone who they deem as very high up or a good person by the recommendation, and not someone who really knows you. And I think it's more important to get a professor or a supervisor at work that has really worked with you and that really knows who you are to write your recommendation than someone who doesn't know you as well but might have a higher title. And so there's definitely some thinking that goes in when choosing recommenders. The recommendations are a very pivotal role in the application process.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I personally didn't read the recommendations that were written for me. I think they give you the option to sort of whether or not you want to have them blind or whether or not you want to read them. I chose not to, but yeah, you do want to choose carefully on who's recommending you and make sure it's someone who knows you. And because like, even if you don't read it, it's like, if someone doesn't really know you and they're just throwing fluff on the page, that's going to show through to the admissions committee.
And that is definitely not something we want.
Yeah.
So, more tips in selecting recommenders.
Yeah, so here on the page, we see that it's mentors, professors, employers. When I reached out to old professors and people that I wanted to write a recommendation, it was a very long email. You can obviously reach out and ask them over the phone or whichever way you can talk to them. I sent an email, and it was a very long email about want to go to law school. This is where I'm thinking. Here's my resume. Here's my personal statement. Here's what I've been doing since you've last seen me. If it was a class where I wrote a paper or I submitted some sort of big final project, I keep everything. So I had it on my computer and I just kind of attached that. Oh, this is the essay that I wrote in your class. This is the final project that I worked on in your class, and kind of remind them of who you are if it's been a few years. And that's a good little packet for them to have when writing your recommendation. You could also have couple bullet points listed where you're like, hey, this is kind of the traits that I want to highlight about myself. If you can kind of think about me through this light, you can do that. Obviously, they're going to write their experiences, but you can, give them some insight as to, what your application will look like, and they will make it work.
Yeah, your approach to your recommenders is a lot better than mine. I think I kind of just showed up with like, hey, you remember me, right? But don't do that. Do what Christina did. I do think it's very important also to sort of, if you can, try to have recommenders that highlight different aspects of your personality and who know you in different contexts. So not just professors, like you obviously, I think you have to have at least one professor, or like if you don't have to, you really should. But you can also have employers, maybe like mentors, even like a pastor, like someone, if you can, try to have someone who also knows you in a personal capacity and not just in an academic setting. Obviously, you're applying to a school, so you want the person who knows you in an academic setting, but you also want to showcase that other side of you, the side of you that doesn't come out in the classroom or work environment. So try to vary that up if you can.
So I'd love to ask a question that I don't necessarily think we got to on this particular slide. So how far in advance should they be asking for these recommendations?
You want to give them a lot of time. You don't want to be like, hey, I need this in a week. Like you definitely, I think I reached out probably like right when I got my LSAT score or a couple weeks after. So that was like 3 months. Like you want to give like a lot of time. You don't want them to have to rush it.
That's
I
great.
would say that I've done both. I've asked well in advance, and I've also done the, hey, can I have this in like a week and a half or 2 weeks? and the last thing you want to do is like, you don't want someone to feel like you're rushing them, and like especially if you haven't seen this person in a while, to be like, hey, can you write this in like a couple days? That would be great. It's not a great look. That being said, like you do what you have to do, but it's something that you should plan for in advance. And I think in my situation, I was thinking about, okay, what recommenders do I already have? And what parts of myself do I want to show? And if you have two recommenders saying the same thing, then you might want to have someone else. And I think for me, I kind of last minute was like, oh my God, maybe I might want this person, and ask last minute. So it's not something you can't do, but I think you should, and you should think about it well in advance. That being said, if there's someone that you really want to write a recommendation for you that you know will, just because it's a little last minute, don't not ask if you can get it in, and then make a decision, because you can have as many recommenders send it in, but you get to assign, which schools get which recommender, and stuff like that. So if you know someone who has a deep connection with one of the schools that you're applying to and want them to write your recommendation, but it came up closer to when you want to submit your application, definitely ask, but have backups that you talked about and planned in advance, if that does not pull through.
Yeah, and just one last point to add. If I remember correctly, your recommenders can submit the applications directly to I think it's still the LSAC portal, like even after you've already submitted the rest of your application. So don't necessarily feel like you have to have it ready before you submit. There's a little bit of time where they can submit it after you've already submitted your application.
Amazing. So the importance of a well-crafted recommendation. I think we already touched on this quite a bit throughout, but was there any other points that you two would like to add?
No, I mean it's sort of the same thing, right? It contributes to the narrative of your application, and you want to make sure that this part of it is shored up as well.
So some of the key takeaways. Unlocking your unique story. Christina, did you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so yeah, I just think if you learn anything, honestly, I think the personal statement is the hardest part of the law school application. Everything else is kind of just like, okay, like, kind of shuffling paper around to get it on this website. And obviously, taking the LSAT or whatever test you're taking is a difficult part too. But again, a lot of people have similar numbers. And so the way you can differentiate yourself is telling your story. And sometimes it's just sitting down and brainstorming what are some of the stories that I have to tell? What are some of the unique experiences that make me who I am? What are some of the things that I've experienced that made me grow as a person? And kind of just like, don't think about it. Don't start out saying, I'm going to write the entire statement today. Maybe just sit down and write out some bullet points of things that have impacted you and then talk through them. What do you have to say about them? And as you kind of talk through those things, you can kind of say, okay, this might be a topic that I think I can elaborate on and kind of get people to understand who I am and what I bring to the table.
Yeah, 100%. I think you want to sort of treat it as a creative exercise, because this is sort of the most creative you get to be on your law school application. And you want to tell that unique side of yourself. I think lawyers sometimes get a reputation for being boring suits. And here on the other side of law school, I can say that that reputation is not undeserved. But to the extent that, obviously you have a personality, and so you want to show that. And honestly, like, even beyond this, don't lose that when you get out there, because it is hard. But yeah, you want to keep that uniqueness about yourself, and you want to let that shine through here.
So this actually brings us to our question and answer period. I'm going to give people a few minutes to kind of get their questions in. But in the meantime, we did have somebody ask a question already. So I think this is in regards to recommenders. Seems to be a very popular topic. So they're asking, so you're saying the length of time is more important than choosing someone specifically from the legal field. So yes, this is recommenders, and essentially the individual is asking, which one's more important, the length of time you've known someone, or getting a recommender who maybe you haven't known as long, but they work in the legal field? And of course, this is open to both of you. And I think we'd love to hear both of your thoughts on the topic.
Yeah. I would definitely say you want to pick somebody who knows you well over someone who's in the legal field. I don't necessarily know how much it matters necessarily if you have someone in the legal field. Like, maybe if they're an alum of the school, then that might carry some more weight. But I know for me, my recommenders, none of them were in the legal field. They were both professors, and neither were lawyers. One was a former lobbyist, one was a journalist. So neither were lawyers, and none of my recommenders were in the legal field, and turned out all right. I don't think it matters a ton necessarily what field they're in.
Yeah, I don't think them being in the legal field is relevant. If you do know someone that's in the legal field, it could be helpful, but the most important part is how well they know you. And I want to make a point that just because you've known someone for an amount of time doesn't mean they know you super well. And for example, I had a professor that maybe I had my first year of college, and I see them around. Maybe I had a second class with them, so I've known them for 4 years. But maybe I have a professor that I took during my junior year who I got to know really well, and I worked with. Maybe I wasn't one of their assistants. Maybe they really got to know me. So just because I know the other professor for 4 years, but I know this other professor for 2 years, I would go with the professor that I know for 2 years because I've spent more time with them and they've spent more time getting to know me. So I would say that it's really the it's really the strength of the interaction that I think comes out on top. I would say how well they know you, regardless of the time. Then then if it matters to you, field, because I know some, maybe you have like a million recommendations and you have to choose. Then I guess you can kind of start splitting hairs. So some schools max out at 2 or maybe 3. So I think it's really who knows you the best, who can write the most compelling statement on your behalf.
I love that. And the individual says, thank you. So we've definitely answered their question. Somebody else wrote in and is asking, how many law schools should someone apply to? From my understanding, I don't think there's a specific number, but I'd love to open the floor to both of you to see your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of depends on your situation. If you're feeling lucky, you can apply to one. If you're not, then apply to as many as you would actually go to if you got it. I think that's probably the best way. Like, don't apply to a school that you wouldn't go to because you're wasting your money. Because each application costs a certain amount of money. If you wouldn't go there, then don't apply. But apply to as many schools as you would go to if you got it. That I think would be the best way to do it.
I will also add, I 1000% agree to that. I think it's a very stressful process and it costs a lot of money. Some schools have separate essays that you have to write. So don't put more stress on yourself to write all these supplementals that you don't need, especially if you're not interested in it. There is something to be said about scholarship negotiation on the back end and thinking through maybe applying to different types of schools so you can have leverage in terms of negotiating scholarship, even if you know there's one you want to go to, but you might get money from somewhere else. And that's more a question of strategy. But I really wouldn't apply to schools that have no purpose for no reason. When you're thinking about what you want to apply to, there should be a method to the madness, whether it's I actually want to go there, whether it is, I can probably get a scholarship from them and kind of see how things move. But even in that sense, it should really be schools that you can see yourself excelling in.
Fantastic. So I want to be mindful of time. So I think we have time for one more question. And this one's really interesting. So if your undergrad major was not pre-law, can you still apply to law school? How do you explain what you can bring to the table at law school?
I wasn't a pre-law major. I don't think my school even had pre-law as a major. And I think there are plenty of people who did it, but in my class at Georgetown, but I don't think it really matters. I think the conventional wisdom that I've heard, and I think this is very much true, is it doesn't really matter what you major in undergrad as long as you do well in your classes. So don't feel the need like you have to explain why you weren't pre-law. Like, I didn't even know I wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer until basically until a month before I applied. I had spent my teenage years thinking I was going to be a musician, right? And then I realized I didn't want to be broke, but that's another story. Anyway, I think it doesn't really matter if you were pre-law or not. Just if you're applying right now, then don't worry about what your major is. And if you're still in school and thinking about applications a couple years out, just major in something that you like and think that you can do well in.
Christina, I see you nodding your head along.
I agree with all sentiments. That's my answer exactly.
Amazing. I do see a couple more questions coming in. I apologize. It doesn't look like we'll be able to get to them tonight. However, I do encourage you to reach out via email. We have free consultations. Reach out to us on social media, and we'll make sure that somebody gets back to you in one way or another. So panelists, thank you both very much. John and Christina, it's been an incredibly engaging conversation. Both of you are absolutely wonderful, and congratulations on your successes thus far. And to our amazing audience, thank you for being here and present and interactive and spending the last 45 minutes with us. With that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. Take care, all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.